It is 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The house is completely quiet. You make hundreds of millions a month, yet you are standing at the kitchen sink, the cold water running over your hands, carefully washing out a 10-cent plastic Ziploc bag so you can dry it and use it again tomorrow. Society looks at this behavior and calls you a financial genius. Traditional finance media tells you that skipping the $4 morning coffee is the ultimate virtue of wealth building. But I think they are entirely wrong. That $4 coffee guilt isn't financial responsibility. What the evidence seems to indicate is that your extreme frugality is actually an unhealed trauma response, one that is actively destroying your wealth, fueling your burnout, and temporarily dropping your cognitive function. Discipline brings peace. What you have brings panic. When you have been guarding yourself against ruin for long enough, it stops being a financial strategy. It becomes the shape of how you move. You treat your money not as a tool for living, but as a fortress. Every dollar spent feels like a physical brick pulled from the walls of your sanctuary. You are booking a flight for a vacation you supposedly earn. You spend 3 hours opening incognito tabs, agonizing over a $30 difference in airfare. Your jaw is tight. You finally book the cheaper flight with the terrible 6-hour layover, feeling a physical stone in your stomach the entire time. And here is what I keep wondering about that specific moment. What exactly were you protecting in those 3 hours? There is something I came across recently from behavioral economists at Harvard and Princeton that I keep thinking about in this context. The research on scarcity, specifically from Sendhil Mullainathan, points at something that, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The finding, roughly, when the brain operates under a persistent scarcity mindset, the constant fear that there will never be enough, it enters a state of cognitive tunneling. This tunneling creates a literal bandwidth tax. The mental overload of constantly calculating pennies causes a temporary drop in cognitive and reasoning tests equivalent to 13 IQ points. It pushes average intelligence near the range of clinical disability. And if that is true, it means the exhaustion you feel at the end of the day isn't weakness. It is the cost of doing something metabolically expensive, quietly, for a long time. It forces terrible long-term decisions. You might pass up career opportunities because the transition feels too unstable, or ignore preventative health care because the copay feels like a threat. Math doesn't care about your anxiety. And what this does, or rather, what it keeps doing over time, is it creates a strange paradox. People operating under the scarcity loop often pinch pennies on small items but hemorrhage dollars on big ones. I have noticed this subconscious cycle where you might feel an intense, irrational guilt over a basic meal. But then, in a blur of cognitive overload, you spend too much on something else, forget the pain of it, and then spend again. Your income scales up to hundreds of millions a month, and somehow, you still cannot seem to hold onto the peace that wealth was supposed to buy. You are not actually saving money. You are paying a massive premium just to buy the temporary feeling of safety. This brings us to what I call the hoarder's illusion. Extreme savers often leave vast amounts of money in basic checking or savings accounts, yielding roughly 0.01% interest. You avoid the S&P 500 because the market feels like a predator. But cash isn't a shield. It is a melting block of ice. By hoarding cash to protect pennies, you are actively losing purchasing power to inflation. Your frugality isn't a financial strategy. It is an expensive emotional pacifier, which is, objectively, a lot of energy to spend on a bank account that is slowly evaporating. But you know how this goes. I keep coming back to this. What made this feel so necessary? Not the behavior, but the need for it. When I look at the data, it starts to make sense. Experian recently reported that over 68% of U.S. adults have experienced financial trauma, up from a 23% benchmark in 2016. For many of us, this is a generational inheritance. It is a psychological legacy traced back to the severe 1981 recession or the 2008 crash. You watched your parents. They always wanted to spend to build the family home, but they rarely held onto cash. Whenever there was money, it had to be converted into physical things for the house. Buying, buying, and buying. Because holding liquid cash felt fundamentally unsafe. Those physical items were necessary, sure, but not always needed right in that exact moment. You absorbed that panic. You learned that stability is fragile. And the pattern persists, even when the environment changes. There is Stanford-linked research on how people handle sudden wealth that makes this undeniably clear. They studied individuals who received a $55,000 life insurance payout. The finding was staggering. Extreme frugality and poor financial decision-making persisted even after acquiring this sudden wealth. The money changed, but the nervous system did not. The mechanism protected you then. That was an intelligent response to what was actually happening in your childhood. But right now, today, does the mechanism know where the threat is? Or is it just running? The pattern was built by circumstances. It is maintained by habit, and habits can be examined when you are ready to look at them. And this is the part that I have thought about how to say this. I still don't have the version that does it exactly right. But here is the closest. Your extreme frugality isn't financial responsibility. It is PTSD-like financial trauma. You are trying to use a bank account to heal a nervous system that is stuck in survival mode. But money cannot heal a trauma response. You didn't protect yourself from being hurt. You protected the story that says you are always one day away from ruin. I have suggested a way out of this to people. It doesn't always work exactly as I describe, but the direction tends to hold. It requires moving from a survival mindset to an abundance mindset through strict pre-purchase planning. When you plan the utility of every dollar before you spend it, you give your brain permission to release the guilt. You stop buying randomly, and you stop hoarding blindly. You finally tell your nervous system that the war is over. If you have been watching this alone, which I think most of you are probably not going to tell anyone you watched it. That is fine. But if something landed, sit with it for longer than feels comfortable. That is the whole ask. You will probably wash another plastic bag tomorrow. Not because you don't understand this now, but because understanding and doing are two very different speeds. And I keep wondering, what would it feel like specifically to trust that you finally have enough? You are safe now. Act like it.